This is Where the Birch Trees Whisper, written by Beryl Coops.
In the frozen wilderness of revolutionary Russia, survival is never a given. Where the Birch Trees Whisper is a tense and atmospheric tale of survival, guilt, and the human capacity for resilience. It explores the bonds forged in the harshest winters and how mercy can flicker to life even where hope seems long buried. Katya stumbled through the endless white of the forest, her legs dragging as if iron weights were tied to them. The snow had swallowed the world whole, muting it into silence, a silence broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing. Frost gnawed at her lashes, and every inhalation burned her lungs like glass. Each step sank into drifts that seemed intent on swallowing her, pulling her deeper into their cold embrace. Her boots, once polished leather stitched by a Moscow cobbler, were split at the seams, rimmed with ice. Every time she tried to curl her toes, she felt nothing. The satchel across her shoulder knocked against her hip with each staggering step, a dead weight she lacked the strength to throw away, though she knew its contents would not keep her alive much longer. The trees whispered as the wind wound through them, tall birches bent like pale mourners under their burden of snow. Beyond them, faint at first, a grey thread of smoke curled into the leaden sky. Her eyes fixed on it as though it were salvation. She pushed toward it blindly, head bowed, her breath shallow and wet with exhaustion. By the time she reached the cabin, her knees had buckled. She fell to the frozen earth, forcing herself up again only by instinct, not will. Her knuckles rapped weakly on the wood. The sound barely carried in the storm. The door opened on a groan of hinges, spilling a wedge of dim lamplight across the snow. A woman stood there, broad-shouldered beneath a bundle of woolen shawls, her face sharp and shadowed. The smell of smoke and animals drifted past her. Katya blinked, dazed, until recognition slid into place like a blade between ribs. Anya. The woman's dark eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening into something colder, sharper. She said nothing, but the look on her face was as cutting as the wind outside. Katya lowered her gaze first. Anya stepped aside without a word. It was not warmth that opened the door, but necessity. Winter was a merciless jailer, and she could not afford to leave another body frozen on her doorstep, noblewoman or not. The Red Guards were already combing the forests for fugitives. Corpses drew questions. Inside, the cabin was spare, a hearth smouldering low, a rough-hewn table, tools neatly stacked, and the lingering smell of boiled cabbage. A pot hissed faintly on the fire. Katya collapsed near it, trembling so hard she could barely bring the chipped bowl of broth to her lips. Anya moved about her work, feeding logs to the fire, checking the latch. She watched Katya from the corner of her eye, not trust but calculation. Katya was no threat. Her once proud figure was gaunt, her hands blistered and raw from cold, but perhaps she might fetch water, carry wood, scrub pans. Survival was a brutal arithmetic. Another pair of hands, however feeble, might be useful. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of silence and clipped commands. Anya thrust a broom at her, shoved a pail into her stiffened hands, pointed her toward the woodpile. Katya obeyed, gathering kindling with fingers that cracked and bled, feeding chickens that flinched from her unfamiliar touch. She scrubbed until her knuckles split, leaving smears of red against the metal pans. When words came, they were edged, brittle as ice. Neither dared touch the fire at the heart of their shared past. Every glance carried accusation. Every silence was heavy with what was unsaid. And late one night, as the wind howled like wolves beyond the birch trees, and the fire sank to embers, Katya's mind dragged her backward into memory. She saw again the great hall of her family's estate, lit by chandeliers, filled with the laughter of well-fed men. She saw Anya standing before them, ragged, starving child pressed against her chest, her face pale with desperation. "Please," Anya had whispered, voice breaking, "a crust of bread, a little milk. He won't last the week." Katya's father had sneered, raising his glass as if her suffering were a jest to toast. His voice had carried scorn sharp as a whip. "Beg elsewhere. We are not a charity." The guests had laughed. Katya had stood among them, rigid, her mouth dry. She had said nothing, done nothing. 3 days later, Anya's son was dead. The laughter of that night had faded, the estate burned, the revolution rising like fire in the east, but the weight of Katya's silence had never left her. It followed her now into the forest. into the cabin, into every glance Anya gave her, and it waited, like a debt yet to be collected. The days dragged on, each colder than the last. Frost crept across the cabin windows at night in delicate veins, and the wind howled as though the forest itself mourned. They worked side by side in silence, hands stiff from the cold, breath misting in the dim kitchen light. That evening they sat at the table, peeling potatoes with dull knives. The fire snapped weakly in the hearth. Katya's hands shook as she worked, not only from the cold but from the weight of words pressing against her throat. At last she cleared it, her voice barely more than a rasp. "I was there," she said, the knife in Anya's hand stilled. "That day," Katya swallowed. "I should have." The blade slammed onto the table with such force the bowl rattled. The sound cut through the cabin louder than the storm outside. "You should have what?" Anya spat, her voice low but seething. "Spoken up? Defied your father? Handed me a loaf of bread as if charity from your white hands would have saved him?" Katya flinched, her own knife slipping from her grip. She pressed her palms against her face, words tumbling out with sobs. "I wanted to. I hated every word he said, every cruel laugh, but Her voice broke. "I was afraid. Afraid of them. Of him. Of what it would mean if I stepped forward. I was a coward. I've lived with that cowardice every day since." Anya's jaw clenched, her knuckles white around the hilt of her knife. Her breath came fast, uneven. For a long moment she could not speak. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I held him, you know." Her eyes glistened, but her tone was as sharp as glass. "I held my baby as his body grew cold in my arms. He whimpered until he couldn't any more. And all the while you stood there, your mouth shut, your pretty dress clean, your belly full. You just watched." The words struck Katya harder than any blow. She bent over, tears spilling between her fingers, her shoulders shaking. The silence that followed was unbearable. The only sound was the wind keening against the cabin walls, the fire hissing low in the grate. At last, Anya pushed her chair back and stood, her breath harsh. She paced the room, arms folded, as though wrestling with something she could neither speak nor bury. Katya remained hunched at the table, weeping into her hands. And slowly, hesitantly, the silence shifted. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but something raw had been cracked open. In the days that followed, their words came haltingly at first. What began as sharp commands grew into grudging conversation, then into stories shared in the weary glow of firelight. Katya spoke of her brother, how he had tried to protect the estate's workers during the uprisings, how the Bolsheviks had dragged him into the street and shot him without trial. She told of the fire that consumed their house, the thick black smoke rising over the countryside like judgment. Anya listened, lips tight, but in time she spoke too. She told of her husband, a man with rough hands and a soft laugh, buried under a mine collapse before she could even say goodbye. She spoke of her boy, his crooked smile, his laughter in sleep, how sometimes she still reached for him in dreams. Those stories became a fragile thread between them. It did not erase the past, nothing could, but it softened the bitterness. They found themselves cooking side by side at the hearth, mending worn clothes in silences that no longer scraped like blades. And one bitter morning, as the birch trees outside bent beneath a howling wind, Anya smirked as Katya's dough collapsed into a sticky mess. "Your bread," she said dryly, "could kill a man quicker than winter." For a moment Katya only stared at her, startled. Then a laugh broke from her lips, thin at first, then fuller, warmer. It startled even her. She had not laughed in years. Anya looked at her, and though her expression didn't soften, she did not look away. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Snow drifted outside in soft, silent sheets piling high against the birches. Inside the cabin the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and carrots stewing. Anya's knife chopped steadily against the board. Katya crouched near the fire, coaxing the embers to life with careful blows. Then came the knock. Not timid, not neighbourly, sharp, deliberate. Anya froze mid-cut. Katya's head jerked up, the colour draining from her face. Their eyes met, wide, frightened. Neither needed to say the words aloud. The Red Guards. The door swung open before Anya could reach it. 3 young men stamped inside, snow clinging to their boots, rifles slung casually but with purpose. Their uniforms were patched, their cheeks raw from the cold, but their eyes carried the hard edge of men who had seen killing and learned to live with it. One, the leader, stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. It landed on Anya and lingered. "There are rumors of nobles hiding in this region," he said flatly. "You've seen anyone suspicious?" Anya's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt Katya shrink behind her, head bowed, trying to look small, ordinary. But even in rags, even dirt smudged, Katya's bearing was wrong. A noble upbringing clung to her like a shadow. One slip, one long look, and they would see it. Anya set the knife down carefully. She folded her arms, squaring her shoulders as if irritated by their intrusion. "No," she said, steady and calm. "Just me and my cousin. She came from Perm after her husband died." She jerked her chin toward Katya. "She's slow in the head now. Grief took her wits." The leader's eyes flicked to Katya. She trembled, but kept her gaze fixed on the floor. One of the others, a boy barely older than 16, sneered. "Doesn't look slow to me. Looks soft. Hands too clean for chopping wood." "She drops things all the time." Anya shot back before Katya could move. She snatched the carrot from the board and flung it toward Katya, who startled and let it slip through her fingers. It rolled across the floor. The guards laughed, rough and humorless. The leader smirked. "Seems you're right." They searched the cabin anyway, shoving open the cupboard doors, pawing through blankets, glancing beneath the bed. Anya stood with her arms folded, her chin raised, daring them to look harder. She felt sweat trickling beneath her shawl, despite the cold. Finally, with a grunt, the leader waved them toward the door. Nothing here, just two peasants scratching out an existence. Their boots thudded against the floorboards as they left, dragging the cold air in their wake. The latch clicked shut. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then Katya's knees gave out. She crumpled to the floor, her hands pressed over her face, her whole body shaking with ragged sobs. Anya didn't move at once. She stood staring at the door, listening to the wind swallow the sound of retreating boots, until her own knees felt weak beneath her. Slowly she crossed to the hearth. She poured tea into a cup with hands steadier than she expected, though her heart still raced. She set the cup gently before Katya. Her voice, when it came, was low but firm. "I could have turned you in," she said. "It would have been easy, safer. And maybe," she hesitated, her throat tight, "maybe once I would have." Katya lifted her head, eyes red and swollen, tears carving raw paths down her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Anya crouched before her face softened by the firelight. "But I didn't do it for the girl who watched me beg." Her tone carried no bitterness now, only weary truth. "I did it for the woman sitting here now, the one who carries the weight of silence and still wants to make it right." Katya's breath hitched. More tears spilled, but she didn't speak. She couldn't, because in that moment she understood. Forgiveness wasn't a prize you won with apology. It wasn't something you bought with penance. It was a gift, a fierce, trembling act of mercy. And Anya, with her grief still raw and her strength worn thin, had chosen to offer it. The fire popped softly. Outside, the birch trees whispered in the wind, their branches brushing one another like voices sharing old secrets. Secrets at last laid to rest.
This was Where the Birch Trees Whisper, written by Beryl Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.